Hello and welcome to our first lesson in this 3ds Max course. Whether you're completely new to 3D modeling or have some experience, this course is designed to provide you with a solid foundation. We will start from the absolute basics and gradually progress to more advanced concepts, including high-quality rendering using V-Ray. By the end of this course, you will be able to create complex 3D models, produce realistic renders, build projects based on blueprints, design custom materials, and much more. Today's lesson is crucial because it covers the very first steps in using this software, understanding the interface, creating simple objects, and learning how to manipulate them. Every professional 3D project, whether it's for animation, game design, or architectural visualization, starts with a firm grasp of these fundamental skills. If you haven't installed 3ds Max yet, pause this lesson and download it from Autodesk's official website. Once installed, open the software, and let's begin exploring its features together. When you first open the software, you will see a workspace filled with various tools, buttons, and menus. It might seem overwhelming at first, but don't worry. We'll go through everything step by step so you can quickly become comfortable with the layout. The interface consists of the main menu, the toolbar, the viewports, the command panel, and the timeline. Understanding how these elements work together will help you navigate the software efficiently. At first, let's quickly review the main functions of the top menu. Later, we will go into more detail. Just like almost any other graphics software, the main menu contains essential core functions like File, Edit, Tools, Graph Editors, Rendering, and Customize. Under File, you can save, open, import, and export projects. Edit contains object editing and undo-redo functions, which can also be found in the top left corner of the window, making it more comfortable to use. The best option for this is using Ctrl-Z on your keyboard to undo your last action. To redo a previously undone action, use Ctrl-Y. If you want to reset your scene without closing the software, just go to File and click Reset to start fresh. Tools include alignment, mirror, and layer management utilities. Rendering allows you to generate final images from your 3D scene. Customize lets you adjust UI settings and change shortcuts. On the toolbar below the main menu, you will find a shortcut bar for quick access to frequently used tools, such as selecting, moving, rotating, and scaling objects. Hovering over any button will display a tooltip explaining its function. In the center of the screen, there is a viewport area. This is where your 3D objects will appear and where you will construct and modify models. By default, there are 4 viewports. Top view is for arranging objects from a bird's eye view. The front view is for aligning objects vertically. Left view helps in adjusting depth. And the perspective view provides a realistic 3D view of the scene. Clicking on one of these viewports allows us to select the one we want to work in. In the bottom right corner of the screen, there's a button to toggle viewport maximization and minimization. The shortcut for this is Alt-W. Let's select the perspective viewport and maximize it using the Alt-W hotkey. You can change the view of your objects using different rendering modes. The default shading mode shows the object with basic color and shading. High-quality mode gives us a more detailed view with textures and lighting effects. And performance view reduces scene load by optimizing viewport display with simplified shading. Pressing F3 switches your view to wireframe mode, which shows only the object's outline without any surfaces. Pressing F4 shows edged faces mode, which displays the object with its edges visible, helping you see its structure more clearly. To rotate the viewport, click and hold Alt middle mouse button and move your mouse. To zoom in and out, use the middle mouse scroll wheel. To pan the view, click and hold the middle mouse button, then drag. We can quickly switch between viewports using the following hotkeys: T for the top view, F for the front view, and L for the left view. To return to the perspective view, press P on your keyboard. On the right side, we can see a command panel. This is where object creation and modification happen. It consists of 6 tabs. Create tab, used for generating basic 3D objects like geometry, shapes, light, and cameras. Modify tab allows us to adjust object parameters. It also provides access to a list of built-in modifiers, which we will explore later in this course. Hierarchy, Motion, Display, and Utilities tabs offer advanced controls for animation and scene management. At the bottom of the screen, we can see the timeline, primarily used for animation, and play, pause, and keyframes creation buttons. Let's create our first 3D object, a simple box. Navigate to the command panel, select Create tab. Select Geometry, and from the drop-down menu, choose Standard Primitives. Click on the box. Move your cursor to the perspective viewport and click and drag to define the base of the box. Release the mouse and move the cursor upwards to set the height. Click again to finalize the shape. Now that we have a box, let's change its properties. Select the box by clicking on it. Switch to the Modify tab, and from here you can adjust the length, width, and height values. Observe how these changes affect the shape. All three-dimensional objects have an underlying topological structure. To visualize an object's topology, press the F4 key on your keyboard. This enables edged faces, making the object's wireframe visible in the viewport. As you can see, edges have appeared on our box. By default, the box has a simple topology, but we can refine it by adding more subdivisions. To do this, go to the Modify panel and adjust the length, width, and height segments. Increasing these values adds more geometry, providing finer control for modeling and deformation. Let's create another object, such as a sphere. Navigate to the command panel again and go to the Create tab. Make sure Standard Primitives are selected, then click on Sphere. Move your cursor to the perspective viewport. Click and drag to define the size of the sphere, and release the mouse button to finalize the shape. Make sure the sphere is selected and then navigate to the Modify tab. Under the object parameters, you can adjust the radius and the number of segments that define the sphere's topology. Try reducing the segments to a minimum and observe the result. You'll notice that the sphere becomes more faceted, resembling a low polygon shape instead of a smooth surface. This is because fewer segments mean less geometry, which simplifies the object's structure. Try looking at the object from different angles. To do this, hold Alt, press the middle mouse button, and drag the mouse as we mentioned earlier. You'll notice that our view is currently focused on the sphere we are working on. To switch to a different object, first zoom out in the viewport. Then, select the box and press Z on your keyboard. This centers the viewport on the selected object, making it the new focus of your workspace. Now let's move the object. When using the Move, Rotate, and Scale tools, you interact with objects through a gizmo, a visual handle that helps control transformations along specific axes. To move an object, press W on your keyboard. You'll see 3 arrows, each representing movement along a different axis. In 3ds Max, the x-axis is represented by red and controls movement along the left and right directions. The y-axis is green and controls movement forward and backward, and the z-axis is blue and controls movement up and down. Click and drag an arrow to move the object along that specific axis. Try moving the object in different directions to observe how it behaves. Holding Shift while moving the object creates a duplicate of the object. To delete it, select and hit the Delete button on your keyboard. To rotate an object, select it and press E. A rotation gizmo with 3 rings will appear. Click and drag any of the rings to rotate the object along the corresponding axis. To resize an object, press R, which will activate the scaling gizmo. There are 2 ways to scale an object: uniform scale and non-uniform scale. First one allows for proportional resizing. Drag the center of the gizmo upward to enlarge the object or downward to shrink it. Non-uniform scale lets you stretch or compress the object along a specific axis by dragging the respective axis individually. Try scaling objects in different ways to see how the proportions change. When you select an object and right-click on the Move, Rotate, or Scale tool, the Transform Type In menu appears. This allows for precise transformations by entering exact values instead of manually adjusting the object. A related feature is Angle Snap Toggle, which helps control rotation accuracy. When enabled, it constrains rotation to specific increments, by default 5-degree steps. This is useful when aligning objects or ensuring precise angular adjustments. You can toggle it on and off by clicking its icon on the toolbar or pressing A on your keyboard. In 3D, every object has its own pivot point. This is the central reference point around which the object moves, rotates, and scales. However, the pivot is not always located at the geometric center of the object. It can be placed anywhere, and its position greatly affects how the object behaves during transformations. For example, if the pivot is placed in a corner of the object, rotating it will make it spin around that corner instead of its center. This becomes especially important when animating objects or positioning them accurately in relation to other elements in your scene. To change the position of an object's pivot point, you first need to select the object whose pivot you want to adjust. Once selected, go to the Hierarchy panel on the right-hand side of the interface. In this panel, you'll find the Adjust Pivot section, which gives you control over how the pivot behaves and where it's located. Here's how the controls work. When Affect Pivot Only is enabled, any movement, rotation, or scaling you perform will affect only the pivot, not the object itself. This is the main option used when you want to reposition or reorient the pivot. Center to Object moves the pivot to the geometric center of the object. It's helpful when your pivot has been moved and you want to restore it to the middle. Align to Object aligns the pivot's axis with the current orientation of the object. Use this if your pivot seems misaligned after rotating the object. Align to World aligns the pivot to the world axis. It's useful when you want the pivot to ignore the object's rotation and snap to the global coordinate system. The Reset Pivot option resets both the position and orientation of the pivot back to its default state, typically centered and aligned to the object's original axis. By using these controls, you can precisely set where the pivot should be and how it should behave, which is critical for modeling, animation, snapping, and many other tasks. After placing the pivot in your desired location, simply click the Affect Pivot Only button again to deactivate it. This will lock in the new pivot position and return the transform tools to affecting the object itself, rather than the pivot. Alright, now that we've gone through the box, the sphere, and the basics of object control, let's take a quick look at the rest of the standard shapes we have in our toolkit. These are called standard primitives, and they help us build almost anything from simple forms. Usually when we start creating a model, we begin with one of the standard primitives. These are our ready-made shapes that we can turn into more complex objects. But here's the trick. You don't just pick any shape. You choose the one that already has a form similar to what you're trying to make. That way, you'll do less work reshaping it later. Let me give you an example. Imagine we want to model a coffee cup. Think about its basic form. It's round, has height, and is hollow inside. So what do we start with? The tube primitive is perfect. It already has a hole in the middle, it's cylindrical, and you can control its height and thickness right away. From there, you can adjust the shape, smooth it out, maybe add a handle using another primitive, like a torus or a bent cylinder. So instead of building everything from scratch, We're working smart by starting from a shape that's already close to what we want. Always ask yourself, what primitive gets me closest to the final shape? That's your starting point. Besides these, there are also a bunch of other primitive objects you can use. However, some standard primitives stand out because of their unique shapes. For example, the plane is a flat 2D surface, useful for creating backgrounds or flat bases. The cone and pyramid have pointed tops, making them ideal for sharp or tapered forms. Besides standard primitives, there are extended primitives. You can find extended primitives in the Create panel by opening the drop-down menu and selecting Extended Primitives instead of Standard Primitives. These are more complex shapes with extra controls, designed for specific modeling needs like chamfer box, a box with beveled edges, oil tank for industrial shapes, capsule, rounded elongated forms, and others. You can test them out one by one. I won't spend too much time on each since they all work pretty much the same way. Extended primitives save time by giving you detailed base shapes that are closer to your final model. So always consider both standard and extended primitives when starting a project to work more efficiently. And at the end of this lesson, I want to explain one more thing related to manipulating these objects, which we'll explore in much more depth later on. That is Snap. This feature allows you to align objects to the grid. You can toggle Grid Snap on or off by pressing the S key or clicking its icon on the toolbar. When enabled, objects will move in increments defined by the grid spacing, ensuring they remain aligned with the grid. Saving your work frequently is essential. Here's how. Click File, Save As. Choose a location and name your project. In this lesson, we covered interface, viewport navigation, view modes, object creation, object modification, move, rotate, scale, gizmos and constraints, and grid and angle snap. These are fundamental skills that will be used in every 3D project. In the next lesson, we'll introduce editable poly modeling, which will allow us to sculpt and refine shapes with more control. See you next time.